Hello and welcome back to this episode of Wisdom Work with Christa and Christy. We're so thrilled to be here again, nervous and excited as usual. And we are going to be talking today about authenticity and finding your truth and what the heck that means to all of us. So, Chris, let's start off by you just sharing a little bit about your story. I know you've done a ton of work with authenticity and getting more and more closer to that core, that connection to your true self. So fill us in a little bit about how that experience was for you. What does that entail even, and how can we find it?
Yes. So, hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be back again for another episode. And this topic is one that I am really excited to dive into. Although I've been excited to dive into every single topic we talked about so far, because we like talking about these topics. But so, authenticity, I think that the journey to authenticity has been one for me that I've been on. If I really look back and think honestly about my life up until this point, I've been on this journey my whole life of just trying to figure out how to be my truest self and how to show up in the world as my most authentic self, because I think that I have been called my whole life. I've had this inner voice and this inner knowing that has been calling me and nudging me to show up as authentically as I can. I just haven't always known how to navigate it. So that's kind of what I want to start off by talking about, is the disconnection that happened really for all of us when we were younger. And we talked about this in the last episode a little bit about how my thought is that we came into this world full of love, peace, and with this inner knowing and with this intuitive guide ready to help us. But how pretty quickly thereafter we were met with the fear of the world around us. And I wanted to start by telling a story about Gabrielle Bernstein. So she is somebody who is a thought leader, a spiritual thought leader, who I have really followed for over a decade now. And Christa and I are both tuned into her, and we've connected a lot over her work. For me, Gabby came into my life at the perfect time for me. It was when my mom had died. I was 24 years old, and I really felt like everything in my life had been flipped, completely turned upside down. And I honestly, the pain was just so intense, and the grief was so intense that I feel like I just didn't know who I was anymore. And I didn't know, it kind of was like whoever I was up until that point felt like it didn't make sense anymore, but I didn't really even know how to go forward. And so in that time frame, after my mom passed, I had really turned to yoga and meditation as a way to process my grieving and my pain. And in that time period, I was introduced to Gabby. I just read an article about her, and she was talking about, following your inner voice and your intuitive inner knowing. And it was something that I felt, like I said, I had been feeling my whole life, but couldn't really put words to, and couldn't figure out how to land in that authentic place and how to really connect to whatever this inner voice was that I was feeling for so long. And so I dove into Gabby's books, and she has lectures, and there's lots of great stuff you can find on her website. And I would encourage everyone to check it out if you aren't, familiar with her. But one of the things that she says, this is a quote, it says, "Love is where we all began. When we're born, all we know is love. And then pretty soon after that, fear is introduced. All it takes is one tiny mad idea to detour us into fear. We choose to forget that we are equally as lovable and worthy as everything everywhere." And at that time in my life, when I was reeling from so much pain and grief, that concept, those words hit me really hard. And they just made me realize that, what I was talking about in the last episode, that like at some point in our younger years, this fear was introduced, and it detoured us away from our inner knowing and away from our intuitive voice. And instead we chose to listen to the voice of others. This was what we talked about in the last episode too, that So that has kind of been my experience, was that Gabby kind of helped me understand that this had happened, this shift had happened, this disconnection had happened. It wasn't my fault that it happened, but that it led me down this path of kind of layering on more and more space between me and my truth. And in losing my mom, I was kind of forced to just come face to face with all of it and kind of decide, how am I going to proceed going forward? Do I want to find a way to reconnect to this truth? Do I want to find a way to show up more authentically? How do I even do that? Where do I begin? So that's also what I really want to help us facilitate, this kind of understanding for everyone that's listening around, how do you do that? If you feel, I don't think that you need to have some earth-shattering loss like mine to want to start this process, or to feel that nudge to go inward and reconnect. If everything that I just said sparked maybe something in you that was interesting, or you thought, yeah, okay, I get that, and maybe I want to try and figure out how I can kind of choose love over fear and go back to that knowing, then let's talk about how we can do that. So for me, it was meditation and journaling were a huge piece of the puzzle for me in reconnecting to that truth. So it's about getting still enough and quiet enough to be with yourself, and to be without the constant chaos that we have going on in our minds, which we all do. That's a really hard thing to overcome when you're trying to get these answers and find a more authentic place to be. It's hard because we are just so programmed to have those racing thoughts and to be looking outside of ourselves. So I know we've talked about this before, but journaling and meditation are really great tools for re-accessing that space within yourself and finding a way back inward. And for me, that's what I leaned heavily on. And in that time in my life when I was trying to make sense of everything. And what I found was that the more that I journaled and just kind of got all of this emotion out of me, for me, I was working through grief and pain before I could even get to the reconnection piece, really. I had to work through a lot of grief and pain. But the journaling helped me so much in that, because I was able to just get so much emotion out of me onto the page. And when you do that, it helps you kind of process and clear a lot of heavy stuff that you could be holding on to. So again, it doesn't need to be that you had a significant loss in your life, but we've all acquired a lot of heavy emotions throughout our lives up until this point. Whether you realize it or not, and whether you feel it or not, it's most likely there, and it's weighing pretty heavy on your heart. So journaling is a great way to kind of try to start to process some of that stuff and remove some of it, so that you can get closer to this truer self. And again, meditation is great because it allows you to still your mind, quiet your mind, and really just get to a space where you can start to ask some important questions that will give you a little bit more clarity and understanding around like who your authentic truth, who that true person even is. And I think once you get to the point where you've started to meditate and journal and process things, that's when you want to start to ask yourself some questions. And I wrote down a couple questions here that I think are important to maybe start the process. And if you think about the things that you loved when you were younger, and you haven't done in years, activities or hobbies, just things that you were passionate about. If you start to think about those things, it kind of naturally reconnects you back into your younger self, to get you a little closer to that space where you were more authentically you before you started to absorb so much of the fear that was being projected onto you. So being able to reconnect with those qualities, hobbies, things within yourself, the passions, can help you better recognize the things that are true and authentic for you. So that's one of my first tips in terms of us really reconnecting and claiming our truth. And then you want to ask yourself questions like, how do I want to be treated? Who or what brings me peace? Who or what makes me feel that external pressure? And maybe how can I quiet the noise and move more inward? So again, these can be questions that you journal about, journal prompts, like just write down the questions I said and then see what comes out when you journal, and see what you kind of, what you maybe don't even remember still exists within you. And it may not even make sense as I'm saying it now, but I promise you, when you get into the process of starting to ask some important questions and taking the time to journal and meditate and just process, you really will start to remember and realize, oh, like that's more authentically me. These thoughts, these feelings, these hobbies, desires, passions, like that's who I am. And maybe I forgot who that person was along the way, right? And so that part of the process, I think, is really, really important in just reconnecting and reclaiming your truth and stepping into, owning that truer part of yourself. Does that make sense?
Totally. I am like so on board with you, and I appreciate how much you shared. I think it's chock full of wisdom. I think I just love when you talk about your mom and the experience that you had, because what it says to me and what I hear you saying is that the the death of someone that you loved so much, like that deep loss, was the other side of the coin, was that you find yourself, like you were brought home to yourself. And I honestly think, like you said, not everybody needs to go through something that hard to find out that our mission here is to come home to ourselves. Like, I think that is everyone's life journey, is that we're born totally whole, complete, and perfect, and then we are socialized, and culture and all the things disassociate us from ourselves. And then our work, our entire life, is the journey, if you choose it to be this way, is about coming back home to yourself and coming back home to loving that entire being that you are. And everyone has so much capacity to love themselves, but it's just that we have so much in the way, just like you said, Chris. So thinking about your heart and how we can unlayer these things and unlearn these things that we were told, these lies that were for our protection. It's not all bad, but it's also not true, and some of the things aren't serving us anymore, but we hold on to them. So it's this journey, and it's this mission, for me at least, to uncover as much as I possibly can, as quick as I possibly can. But I always pray for grace and ease as I go into these depths of myself, because it can be very scary experiencing the darkness. But the darkness isn't always a bad thing. It's just it can just mean that it's unbounded, it's infinite, it's this magnitude. um, and that's kind of this experience I had just last week, where I was shown this like this huge, it felt like um, a really deep depth. And I was scared. I was really, really scared for a long time in the week. And then it started to transition, and I sat with it. And that's something I'm learning too in my 30s. Finally, I'm not numbing, I'm not avoiding it. I'm like sitting there scared out of my mind, being like, what is this? What does this mean? What is the lesson here? And that's what I keep asking my guides, my angels, God, universe, spirit, whatever you call it, the divine. Is for me, when I go into these lessons or learnings or periods of my life where it's more of like um, a pinch in order for an expansion. So I always call on the other realm to help me with that, and to guide me into that, and to teach me the lesson with grace and ease. And I did get that, and I got this beautiful activation or lesson or learning, whatever you want to call it, towards the end of the week, where it was just something that from my childhood, because when we, Chris and I talked about this, when we do these podcasts, we are calling in big things. We're calling in these big topics. And in order for us to talk about it, we have to embody it. So for me, I went through this humongous experience last week just to prep for this podcast. So hopefully something helps somebody listening. But and it did serve me at the end. But what happened was sitting with those feelings, sitting with the discomfort, calling on the people that I needed to talk to in that moment, and that's right action. So you know who that is for you in your life. Having those trusted advisors or those key friends or players in your life where you really can, that they're going to hold the space for you on with no non-judgment, with all acceptance, with open love. Um, and that's who sometimes you need to talk to, and that's what I needed. So I did that, and then I still sat with it, and I still felt really icky and really uncomfortable, and it was scary, and it was all the things. And then it lifted, and then I felt this shift and this alchemy that was happening inside of me, where I started releasing the fear, releasing the anxiety about it, and coming more into the truth of what it was telling me. And what that was it was a healing of something in childhood that was full of shame for me, was coming up and out to be cleared, and it made room, a lot of room. It must have been holding a lot of energy in my body, because it made a lot of room for more love, and for more love and more compassion, and for um, more honesty and more truth about who I really am. And the magnitude, the magnificence of who we all are, and that we have the capacity to love ourselves. It takes work. It takes a lot of work to uncover the things that we were told what we are, or like you said last episode so brilliantly, the VOO, the voice of others. All of these voices are trying to teach us who we are, and it's not true a lot of the time. So that's the work that all the listeners and you and I have to do, is what is true for us, and asking your questions, and talking to whoever you need to from this realm or the other realms, and just saying, show me the truth, let me see the truth, and really calling in divine energy around that, because it can be intense when we do that, because sometimes we're not ready to see what's really true. And that's, again, we always recommend reaching out to us, and we'll guide you in a way that we can direct you to different resources that may be helpful. But also, like what Christy said, is once you start asking these questions, once you start awakening to your path, once you start awakening to your life's purpose, people, guides, resources, books, they will come and find you. Like, it is absolutely amazing to me when I have a question, what comes up on TV, what comes up on the radio, what comes up on my internet, like what comes up on Instagram scrolling. Like, it's amazing. It's answering my questions. So being aware and looking for the answers, they're all around us. And I believe that the divine, or whatever you want to call it, the universe, is constantly in dialogue with us, constantly. And we're right next to, like, we're walking with it, she, him, her, whatever you want to call it, but it's like all around us. So we just need to wake up to it and be aware that we are one with it, universe, one verse, one song. So we are all one with it. And when we can plug ourselves into it and get out of our own way, miraculous things can happen. And that's the ecstatic living that we all want, right? Like this joy, this unbounded joy, which is scary because we're not used to living that way. So when it happens, you're just like, what? Which was my experience.
Oh, I love all the beautiful points you just made, because you really help shape and define the process here, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's not easy enough to just say, like, well, you just gotta undo a lot of crap from your past and want to reconnect with your truth, and everything's gonna be great. Because that's only the beginning. The beginning is recognizing the shift, recognizing all the ways that we have detoured away from our truest selves, and then committing to working through the fears, right? And as you had said, overcoming those fears, because once you have more clearly defined your truth and you begin to own it, it does start to get uncomfortable. Things start to get uncomfortable because it can cause a lot of shifts in your relationships, because you might be shedding what was inauthentic and aligning with what is more true for you, which is a beautiful thing. And truly, as scary as that can be, I want to offer support to anyone listening, saying, like, please stay the course, because Christa and I, as she just explained, we both can attest to the fact that it's worth, coming face to face with this stuff. It's worth, shifting things and shaking things up. Shaking your world up as you know it may sound scary, but I promise you, what comes of that is what Christa was just saying, this magnitude, this joy, this incredible way of being that you probably haven't really allowed yourself to experience yet,
Right.
and the only way that we're going to be able to experience it is if we commit to it, right? You commit to this path, and you commit to yourself, right? Like, you truly are committing. This isn't even about anybody else. This is about you showing up for yourself and committing to yourself that I'm not going to be afraid anymore of what anyone else might think of who I am, or what anyone else might want me to be, or what the world around me wishes I would be. I want to come back to myself, and I want to find a way to show up authentically in this world as exactly who I was meant to be. And only I know that, right? Like, those answers, I think this is important to bring up too, that for so long, many of us have looked for those answers outside of ourselves. We have looked for approval, acceptance, love outside of ourselves. And we are only going to find what we're looking for if we turn and look inside ourselves. And no matter how scary that may look or be, it is truly the only way. It is the only way to that truth. And so as the fears surface, I think for me, one of my biggest fears was, how will I be perceived or received as this new version of myself, right? And that's a big one. And let me just say, you're going to go through that, all of us. If you choose to reconnect, I hate to sound like we're so doom and gloom, like, if you take this path, you better buckle up. But it's
true, and it is, like, what comes out of it is worth it. Yeah.
But it is the reality of it, is like, you have to face these fears. You have to come face to face with all the muck. Like, Chris and I were talking, she so beautifully said, like, when we're preparing for these podcasts, we're actually like walking the walk prior to be able to show up and talk about it. So I literally felt like I was standing in mud last week. Like, I was stuck in mud because
a good metaphor.
We started doing, the prep work for this episode. And just like Christa said, it means that we're calling in a lot of our own crap that we've got to face and work through, so that we can show up and talk about this, no pun intended, authentically. And for me, I experienced the same thing. It's kind of funny that we both went through it the week leading up to this, but seriously, I felt like I was standing in mud, and I have to keep leaning back on these same tools that I already told you about, right? For me, it's meditation and journaling and getting outside in nature, and like just taking the time for myself. And like you said, you have to sit with it. Unfortunately, you have to sit with the scary feelings. You have to sit with the anxiety that it brings up. In terms of being afraid of how I would be perceived, I've had to sit with that for a really long time. And I am only now recently coming to a point where I see myself coming out of it a little bit, and I'm in a new light. Like, I have shed a lot of my former self. And there's a grieving process in that too. And I think that that's
Yeah, I'm glad you
actually,
brought that up.
that's the
Yeah.
mud I was stuck in last week.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
is that I have, you and I have talked about this, Chris, but like,
Hmm.
same as you had mentioned, like I did this work and I've offloaded like this boulder off my chest, basically. And it's amazing. It's cleared up incredible amounts of space within me to show up more fully and with more love. And I can see and sense that I'm also opening myself up for like incredible new opportunities to come into my life because
Hmm.
I have moved this, all that negativity that I was holding on to out of the way. But
Yeah.
with it means that I have truly shed a former self. And that is a
How scary is
really
that?
very, very scary because, and I'll tell
Yeah.
you why it's most scary is because of how we've placed so much emphasis on the world around us and how they perceive us
Yeah.
and what those voices are telling you you should, could, can't, or won't do.
Yeah.
We're so afraid of shifting that or changing that.
Hmm.
You know, we're so afraid of showing up as anything different than that because it's like, well, I've learned how to be who I need to be to fit in here.
Yes.
And for me, that this speaks to the authenticity that I've been longing to connect to my whole life. And I think that that's what's finally shifted for me is I've realized, okay, you moved a lot of crap out of the way. Now you actually have to be brave enough to say goodbye to that former self and to step in to who you really are and who you've always been and
Mm.
be brave enough to say, this is who I am.
Oh, I have chills. I have chills all the way up and down my body because you're exactly right. I love that you brought grief into this conversation because that is something, that I've struggled with a lot, just doing a lot of this work. And I think collectively, we're finding this now. Like there is so much happening in the collective globally that we're literally it feels like the earth is being shaked, being shook. And like humans are being asked, like, wake up to who you truly are. There is no more time to waste. Like we are in, it's like sink or swim, like we got to do this now, yesterday, like now. There's this urgency of like, wake up, love yourself, free yourself, be authentic, find your truth, like engage in like true connection with your brothers and sisters on this globe. Like there's no more time to stay small. And that's scary because it's like one thing when you have the whole world like being normal around you, but you're going through this internally and you're like, okay, like at least this is safe outside of me. And there's opportunities to avoid it. There's opportunities to numb it. There's opportunities to escape it for a minute or two. But it's just right now, I don't know if anybody else feels this, but it's like for me, I feel like internally there's a lot going on. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of healing. There's a lot of awakening and activations, and it's intense. And then there's also all of it going on outside of me in the world, and like structures are being crumbled. The patterns, the thought programs, the things that worked aren't working anymore across the board, like internally and externally. This is something that has never happened before in history. Like it's intense. It's so intense. And there is so much grief. And I want to normalize the grief. It's okay to feel intense, tremendous grief feelings. It's okay to feel denial. That's a way to protect yourself. It's a way to denial, anger, wanting it to go back the way it used to be. Then can we go back to what it used to be? Like you hear that so much globally with the pandemic of like, let's just get back to normal. And it's like, sorry, we have already crossed that threshold. Like there will be no more normal. We're creating that now. So how do we want to create it? And that we talked a little bit about this whole thing and this theme on the first podcast, which we thought we were out of the pandemic, but we weren't. So, it's crossing into this new world, this new way of living, this new earth. How do we want to usher it in? And it's a call to action. This like this action in love, this sacred work that we are doing internally. in order to show up as a full human being, both divine masculine and feminine energies balanced within the one human and moving forward. Like, how amazing would
It's,
that be?
well, that's what I was just going to say, is that when you talk about, I love that you say it feels like we're being shook, because I totally agree. And I think so many people that will resonate with is that, like, internally you may have whatever you have going on, which is very much in tune with what's going on outside of you. You're feeling all of the things, and you're feeling everything shifting, and it's scary, and it's change, which none of us are really all that good at. And but for as scary as it is, also think about how exciting it is and how exhilarating it can be to be here right now on the earth at this moment in time.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
that's
if
the
you can,
alchemy.
right, if you can shift your perspective of that and see it maybe more as not something so traumatic, although you're right, feel all the feels about it, because that's a part of it.
But don't get stuck there.
Don't get stuck there. And maybe if you can shift your perspective to say, wow, maybe this is a gift. Maybe, I think many of us in some way found that through the pandemic, like some sort of silver lining of the gifts you were given in how things had to change, right? And maybe take that into this same conversation about authenticity. And we talked about this, like you said in the first episode, asking yourself, like, too, like, what do I really want going forward? What do I really want my life to look like? My career, my personal life, my own inner life to look like. You know, if you could look at this as like a fresh start, how beautiful is that? How exciting is that? And so, as daunting as this work may seem and can be, because we're going to always keep it real with you on this. It's not all butterflies and roses. But if you can really commit, like I said, to yourself and commit to finding your way to that place that I just said, like, you know, finding that your way to that place that's, I'm me. I'm showing up as truly me. And I'm going to be brave enough to walk through the fear of however anybody else is going to take that. Imagine if all of us did that. Imagine.
Well, we have to. We have to. That's, I honestly think we can't leave this meat suit, our bodies, until we do that. I honestly think that that's the hero and the heroine's journey. We have to address it at some point in our lives, and things come up in our lives because a lot of us aren't like you and I, where we're actively seeking this. Sometimes it's reactionary of a loss, of a, you know, something that happened in our life, and now we have to go inward. Now we have to figure out what's going on if we want it to change. So you brought up change. I love that you brought this word into the conversation again, grief and the change. It makes, it really rounds out this conversation of authenticity and truth, because you need it all. It's the dark and the light. It's the human and the divine. It's all of it. It's not just one thing or another. And that's something that we're also seeing collectively crumble. It's this, the either or is crumbling, and it's the both end rising. So it's allowing for this human capacity to expand into more of a divine capacity, into more of this omniscient, all-loving being that we're walking into the next evolution. So, but change is scary. I will give you that. But when John Paul and I went on this meditation retreat when we first started dating in 2009, and one of the teachers there said, the only thing permanent in life is change, and God lives in the uncertainty. So if the quicker we can make peace with change and the quicker we can sit in uncertainty, that's where it's at. I mean, that's what's going to keep happening in our lives. And if we're resisting it, then we're bringing on more suffering. So when I was trying to think about this podcast and how I could articulate what is such a somatic experience, it's such a personal journey, it's such an intimate experience and a relationship with yourself and with the divine, whatever you call that, within you. I was trying to think, like, how can I put this to words? Because it really does call on the person, everyone listening, if you feel intrigued to do this work, which if you're listening, you probably are. But the first step is that. The first step is curiosity. It's understanding and being super honest with yourself that something's not right here. Something is disconnected. Something's misaligned, and calling it out and just saying like, there's more. I know there's more. This doesn't have to be this way, whatever that may be for you in your life. And it looks different. There's all kinds of flavors with that in everyone's lives. So um, for me, for example, it may have started, I mean, I've been on this journey like you, Chris, like it's been a wild ride, and I don't think I've ever like started or stopped it. It was more just like a flow and an evolution of it. And it kind of, the volume went up on some points in my life and then went down on others. But when John Paul and I first started dating, we also, he was in onto the spiritual path and reading all these books by Deepak Chopra and like the meditation stuff, and he was into it first, and I was still getting drunk at happy hour, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but I was just not there. And so he really like opened my eyes to this kind of work, and I got really curious and intrigued. So I started there, and then it just was like, it just opened my eyes to a whole new world, a whole new way of being. So meditation for me also was a big one that got me more in tune with my internal landscape. Yoga is a huge piece of my life now, and I really value it as a somatic experience because I can be really in my head a lot. So feeling into my body, walking in nature, feeling the grounding energy, and just calling back into the divine mother, the sacred mother, Mother Jaya, the earth, like that energy, the density, the love, the always being there. Calling that in can really help me get out of my head and into my body and feel what's actually happening for me. So step one for me was the curiosity. So getting on the path, I knew there's like a lot more than what I knew. And there always will be a lot more of what's out there that I could be taking advantage of, or that I could be um, kind of getting into a flow of into my own relationship with myself. So there were so many guides and teachers that came out of that period of my life. So the curiosity, and that's something that keeps happening for me. I just keep getting curious about different topics and things, which is awesome because it helps me know more about myself and love myself. So that's the second one. So once you have that curiosity, you start asking these big questions. Teachers, books, things will start coming to you in the form of answers. Then what I think step two is being just very at peace with what you find in yourself. So for example, I'll use the vein of body image for this one because I think it really can resonate. Um, so for example, there's what's called mirror work. So if you stand in front of the mirror and you're completely naked and you look at what you see, what's the first thing that most people think? Like, ugh, I see all the things wrong, right? Or I see all the things I shouldn't want, or I don't want that about myself, or all of the negative kind of comes to the top of mind. So what is asked of us in this kind of work is you look in front of the mirror and you just say non-judgmentally what you see. So it's just total witnessing. It's total accepting. You see a dimple here, you see cellulite here, you see something sagging, you see, some muscle mass, you see whatever you see, and you just say it non-judgmentally. You just call it out. You witness it. From that step, then you can cultivate more compassion and more love because you're being honest with what is. And I think that kind of can transcend to so many areas of our lives. So again, step one's being curious, knowing that there's something out of alignment. And a lot of people won't even get to that point. So a lot of people, it's like, well, it's not broken, why fix it? So that's fine. And and that's okay. That, this isn't for everybody, but it is something that is accessible to everybody if they want it. And the second step is just being with what you find, being totally accepting, and just witness it. Don't judge it. Start to question why you're judging it. Whose voices are they saying your belly should be flat? You shouldn't have cellulite on your legs. You should have, this and that. Like, who is telling you that? And start to question that, and just deconstruct those thought patterns, because that's a way to get to the core of it and just say, is this serving me anymore? Probably not. These are things that we've taken from childhood, we've taken from years ago, that are still running very vividly in our minds. And it just, a lot of times it's broken. It doesn't work. So then step number 3 is cultivating that compassion for what you actually witness and what you actually see and what you find within yourself. Because again, it's all there. It's the dark and the light. It's the divine and the human. It's the mind and the body. It's all of it. So, I think that for me, I had to do that last week when I was going through all this, and channeling the loving parent voice. And this is why I'm so grateful to be a mother, is that I have this voice, and everybody has the voice, but for me, it was really hard to access before I was a mom. And being a mom and practicing gentle parenting and practicing this kind and compassionate, all accepting parent role in my life, that I could flip on myself when I'm going through this spiral of like feelings and thoughts and all the things that are coming up that are perceived as negative, or that I was feeling fear around or anxiety. I could say to myself, Christa, it's okay. You're safe. And literally, like, I would give myself a little rub or a hug, or when I go to bed at night, I hug my shoulder and I just rub it a little bit, like somebody that loves you would, and say, like, you're doing a great job. You're here. Like, you're safe. I got you. And it's just a way of developing this relationship within yourself, developing this relationship with the language you use to yourself, this developing this relationship with the divine, with the universe, whatever you call it, because that, I believe, is a necessity for all this work. I mean, that is what the truth beam is. If you think about, like, this is a visual I use, is like a pillar of light going through my entire body. And that is what's true. That is what's grounding me. So when things get messy and when things get into a spiral, or I'm in my head, or feelings are swirling, I just hold on tight to that beam, and I hold on tight to what's true, and the light, and the protection that the divine or the universe, whatever you want to call God, gives for us. And that's the gift.
Oh, I love, love, love. I mean, those 3 parts of the process that you just broke down are crucial. And I hope everyone was listening intently as you said that, because the self-compassion piece, especially, it's so important that you acknowledge that part of the process, that
Yeah.
we're not doing this work, like I said, it's for you. It's not for any other reason than for you to be able to show up in a more authentic way. And part of that process means you have to love yourself.
Right.
You have to have compassion for yourself in order for you to show up fully as your truest self, right? Like, you have to be your biggest cheerleader. You have to be that mothering voice to yourself in order for you to have the courage to step in fully. And so
Yes.
I love, love, love that you address that self-compassion, because it's huge. And another thing that I wanted to just kick back to that you had mentioned was the part about, how the pain and the love in our lives, the suffering and the love, and the joy and the suffering, it's all a necessary part of the process. And then,
Yes.
like you said, like, we were always about this, like, either or, like, I want a joyful life, so I'm going to avoid the suffering, and
Right.
I want love in my life, so I'm going to avoid the pain. But unfortunately, that is not how we operate in a whole self. right?
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
actually causes more pain and suffering
That's exactly right.
when we think we can separate the two. And
Yeah.
I always say, when I talk about like the whole experience of losing my mom and all the shit that got flipped upside down because of it in me, I'm never more grateful, truly. Like, I would give anything to have my mom back. That is will always be true. I will give anything to have her back. However, I am so grateful for the pain and suffering that I went through in losing her, because it allowed me to become who I am right now, you know?
That's
And
exactly right.
it
Yeah.
allowed me to also just go through this like beautiful process of coming to understand like the love that was in me and the love that my mom planted in me through the 24 years that I had her, and
Mm-hmm.
how that love is now being planted in my own children, and how, you know, everything that I'm doing right now and projecting hopefully positively out into the world is all as a result of the pain and suffering that I had to go through, this
Mm-hmm.
osmosis, you know, like it's the whole analogy of the cocoon and the, you know, the caterpillar, the cocoon and the butterfly. Like,
That's right.
all of the beauty and joy cannot be had without the pain and suffering. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're someone who's always avoided it, it might be time to really stop and think about how that might be holding you back from the
Mm-hmm.
truest joy you could experience in your life right now.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to kind of put your arms around the pain and the suffering, to open yourself up, as crazy as that sounds. It's
Mm-hmm.
true. You have to be willing to say, I'm open to all of it, and I'm going
Yeah.
to be here for myself through all of it. And
Yeah.
that was also the greatest gift. Like I said, I wish I had my mom still, but she also was a rock for me. She was a support system that was phenomenal. But the gift I got in losing her was, like you said, finding myself and finding my way back to being my own rock and
Mm-hmm.
being my own support system. And now
Mm-hmm.
I don't look to anyone else uh, to truly make me feel like I'm enough.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
that to
What
me,
liberation.
that is exactly, and that is what this is all about. And this is what I want for every single person who's listening. I want you to experience that,
Yeah.
what it feels like to know like I'm enough and I am 100% authentically me, no matter how I'm perceived or received by
Mm-hmm.
others. I'm proud of the fact that I'm me,
Yeah.
and that I'm
Yeah.
brave enough to show up as this person who's changing every single day. I'm
That's right.
evolving every single minute. If you want me to be who I was at 25, 16, or 7, I'm never going to be that person.
It's
And
so
neither are
true.
you. You know,
Right.
none of
Yeah.
us are meant to continue to be just like who we were. And sometimes I think that
Yeah.
happens too. People get stuck
Mm-hmm.
in this like glorified time in their lives where
Mm-hmm.
like things felt good or good
Yeah.
enough. And it's like, well, then I have to keep showing up as that person. And I need all the people in my life to continue to play those parts
Mm-hmm.
because that felt safe or that felt good. Right. But
Yeah.
it's that comes back to the conversation of change and
Yeah.
exactly what you said about change. Like you
Yeah. And
have to
curiosity.
accept it.
Like, keep asking questions to friends, to partners, to loved ones. Like, how do you feel about this? Because it will change. People change. That's normal.
Yes.
It's supposed to happen. If it's not, there's a lot of misery that comes from not wanting to change, or the feeling stuck, the feeling trapped. Like, that's what a lot of humans do feel. Like, there's sleep problems. I mean, it manifests in all kinds of ways, where if you're feeling like you're clinging to life, you're clinging to those glory days, or you're clinging to something that you felt comfortable with, there is going to be discomfort. There is going to be suffering, like, no matter what. So you might as well ride with it and feel free as you're doing it, knowing that it comes up and it goes back down. It's a whole, that's why I love the waves. I love the
I know.
ocean. It teaches us so much around these, like, just ride it, be the surfer as opposed to trying to cling to to the ocean as it's going, you're going to get, swallowed up by a wave or crashed on. It's trying to just go with the tide as opposed to controlling it. And I think when you talk about this security in yourself and this grounding into what's true, that piece of you that's the infinite, that is the definition of freedom and true connection. Because everything we're trying to seek outside of ourselves is ever fleeting. The people, the environments, the situations, the pleasantries, like that's finite. So
Yes.
what's infinite is this connection to source and the connection to what we believe is divine or God. Or I don't want people to be turned off by words. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep it whatever flavor you believe is right. I agree with you. So, but that is in all of us, and connecting to that place, however you do it. Christy and I talk about meditation and yoga being a big one. I have been trying to get more into dance, walking in nature's always been a favorite of mine, but dancing, moving your body, like getting more into this physical self can be very helpful in order to understand those cues and those signs and symptoms you're feeling internally, because those are guiding you. Those feelings, like when your stomach or when your solar plexus or your gut like clenches, you're nervous. Listen to that. What's going on? Ask questions. Question everything. Know what your body is telling you. Your body never lies. When you feel expanded and peaceful and joyful, who are those people that you're around? Find them more. What environments are you in? Be in that more. Learning this and using your body as a guiding point in your life to say, what is truth? What feels right to me? And do more of that, because like we said, it's a whole new world. You got a clean slate. Like, let's let go of what doesn't serve. It's fall, autumn. Use the trees as a metaphor. Like, let it go. Let it fall off of you, effortless and with total ease and grace. Those programs and patterns that don't serve anymore. Let it go. Give it back to nature. Give it back to the mother. She's going to hold it all for us. She's holding us. So it's a time of rebirth. It's a time to think about, what do we want in our lives? What do you want more of? What are you going to consciously call in? Because
Yes.
what you are seeking is seeking you. It's this beautiful dance. It's this dialogue. There's always this yin and yang. It's always this connection. And it's a matter of us making the choice to plug into it and to be aware of it.
Totally. Yes. I just wanted to keep shouting like, yes, yes. Because, yeah, everything you just said, everything. That is what it means to really show up and step in. And how do we show up as that authentic self, And
Yeah.
we touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to kind of like wrap up our conversation just by reminding people that stepping in, means that you're committing to yourself, but it does not mean that you're alone in this process. Yes, it's a lot of inner work. But
Mm-hmm.
part of what Christa and I are trying to facilitate here with the wisdom work is giving you this like hug while you do it, and just encouraging
Yeah.
you. We're still encouraging you to do the work yourself, because we can't do it for you and no one else can. But
Mm-hmm.
to know that you're like loved and supported as you go through it, and that we see you, and we've been here, we've been going through it, we're still going through it, we still
Yeah.
every day have to recommit to ourselves and to this
Mm-hmm.
process. But that it's really important to seek out like healing practices. Krista had mentioned yoga. We've talked about meditation and journaling and getting out in nature, um, and finding people, even if it's just one person who you feel like can kind of just be a sounding board for you a little bit as you're trying to navigate this, or uh, also just maybe even trying to find thought leaders that you align with, or
Mm-hmm.
authors and or seek out lectures on these topics. There's so much out there right now in terms of resources for the topic of authenticity, or, how to
Yeah.
show up more fully as yourself. You're going to want to find the people or the resources that fit for you, and so that's
Mhm.
why I think we are leery to like really say go to this person and go do this, or like go do
Mhm.
X, Y, and Z, because it's going to be a very personal process for you. But just know that there's a wealth of resources out there, and if you need
Mhm.
help finding some or connecting to some, like reach out to us. That's what we're here for, and we're happy to help you
Mhm.
if we can. But taking baby steps, like don't try to do too much at once either.
Yeah.
Reminding yourself that this is, I think for those of us that are like doers,
I was
and
just gonna say, I need
Christa
this
and
reminder.
I are, and we're constantly checking each other. Like last week we were saying like, well, we've just got to sit in it. We just got to sit in
Uh-huh.
the mud. Here we are in
No
the mud.
fixing, no fixing
Don't
here.
you fix it. That it's, you have to really remind yourself that this isn't like I'm going to do all these tasks and then like I'll be fixed and the problem's gone. Like
No,
it's an ever
it's lifelong.
evolving situation and you have to stay with it. Um,
Yeah.
but think about how you can start to show up more authentically as yourself and take baby steps and
Mhm.
ask those important questions and try to trigger yourself to remember parts of yourself that maybe you've hidden, or passions
Mm.
that you've tucked away, or all the ways that you said like I'm too busy, not now, I can't do that, or I shouldn't take the time
Mhm.
for myself, or start to unpack that a little bit, and
Yeah.
give yourself, like Christa says, the grace and the space and the ease to start to slowly tackle this work. So we know
Mhm.
we've covered a whole lot in this conversation, a lot. Um, and this is something, Chris and I were talking about prior to recording, like the topic of authenticity, the topic of fear versus intuition, all the things that we've already talked about are going to be topics we're coming back to and unpacking even further, because there's always going to be plenty of conversation to be had around these topics. And we're
Mhm.
just really happy to have you all here tuning in and being a part of the conversation. We do really want to hear from you. We mean that. Please email
Yeah.
us at thewisdomwork@gmail.com. We also have our new Instagram at the Wisdom Work. Reach out to us there. Like, reach out and tell us, either what you're liking about the conversations or what it's bringing up for you, maybe. Like, uh, maybe we can guide you towards, like we said, the resources that could help you, in that way. And just,
Mhm.
or reach out and tell us, what you want to hear, what other topics you'd like to hear discussed. We're
Yeah.
here, and we're so happy to have you here, right, Christa?
Oh, it's such a joy. Like this really feeds my soul. So I just am so grateful for all the listeners. Like Christy said, we get so much out of hearing from you and how this is landing with you. And so please tell us. It is such a joy to hear from people that are wanting to learn about different topics. The feedback that we've received from different episodes that we've done it's just so heartwarming to know we're not alone on this path, like that you are with us and we need to hear it too. We're walking this path and we're trying to be strong and brave by doing this and making these conversations normalized, but we get tripped up too. So hearing from you, you're our community and we love knowing that you're on the path with us and vice versa. So I think yeah, please reach out, rate us, review us on where you listen to your podcast, whether it's YouTube, Apple, or Google Podcasts, because when we get the ratings, when we get the reviews, that helps us reach more people. We're not doing any ads right now, so please help us out. If you're liking this, please to rate and share it with your friends, because like Christy said, it's so helpful when we're doing this with a buddy. Christy and I have had each other for years, and as Gabby B, coming full circle now, Gabby B says spiritual running buddies. It's like you need that buddy to just tell you you're not crazy. You're okay. Everything about you is happening perfectly. And you are perfect with all your imperfections. Like it's all the way it's supposed to be. And having that person, that sounding board that's going to love you no matter what you tell them, is one of the greatest gifts that I have ever felt, is that unconditional love and that acceptance of who I truly am with no conditions. It's like, yeah, you can be you here in this space, and we will love you and we'll accept you. We won't make you feel weird. We won't make you feel outcasted or shamed. So that's what we hope to do for this community. And it's a beautiful, I think it's growing and it's beautiful to see it flourishing. So we have a lot of goodies in store for all of you coming up with the holiday season. So stay tuned for more, and we're just so happy to be here.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you next time on the Wisdom Work with Christa and Christy.